Sie heute zur 63. Folge von Künstler im Dialog des Opern- und Kulturmagazins Operius. In jeder Folge wird eine Künstlerin oder ein Künstler vorgestellt. Heute hören Sie den freischaffenden Tenor Gustavo Lopéz Manzitti. Sind Sie in einem musikalischen Elternhaus aufgewachsen und was waren dann Ihre ersten Berührungspunkte mit Musik?
Yes, several members of my family have devoted themselves to music. My mother, for example, is a lyric soprano and pianist. My dad is a baritone. He has sung opera and specialized in zarzuela, the Spanish lyric genre. My mother is 87 years old and my father is 97, and both still sing and play. My younger brother, on his part, is also a baritone and is developing a very interesting career in opera. And my elder sister is a leggero soprano and devoted herself, like my father, to zarzuela. So, since I was born, I have been surrounded by singers.
Lernten Sie neben dem Gesang noch weitere Instrumente?
Yes, I studied piano at the Carlos López Buchardo National Conservatory in Argentina. I was also a member of a musical humoristic group, very famous in Spanish-speaking countries, called Le Luthier. They make humor about classical music. And working with them, I learned to play several traditional instruments, such as trombone, guitar, violin, double bass, as well as other very exotic and funny original instruments that they designed and built. Hence the name of the group, Luthier, which were those instruments very difficult to play.
Wie kamen Sie erstmals mit Oper, Operette oder allgemein mit Musiktheater in Berührung?
That happened through my mother. She worked during many decades as a choir singer in Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires, considered one of the most important opera houses in the world. And many times she took me to the opera performances there, in which the celebrities of those times sang. I loved to hide backstage and spy on the performances from there. The singers seemed to be like beings from another world, not human at all. And I did not believe that I could ever be like them at all. I also attended many rehearsals at home and concerts in various halls, in which my task was sitting next to my mother at the piano to turn the pages of the scores.
Was löste dann den Wunsch aus, selber als Sänger auf der Bühne stehen zu wollen und wer ermutigte Sie, diesen Schritt dann auch zu gehen?
Wanting to be a singer happened at a later stage of my life. At the beginning, when I was a teenager, and perhaps as a result of a rebelliousness that led me to want to differentiate myself from my family, I dreamed of being a pianist, composer, and also becoming a rock star surrounded by synthesizers in the style of Keith Emerson. In fact, I formed a couple of groups of what was then called progressive rock or symphonic rock, with strong classical and jazz influences. I still treasure the synthesizers I used by then, but I didn't sing in those groups, which were just instrumental. And I didn't want to study music either. But I knew a Spanish teacher, José Martí Llorca. He was a violist of the Philharmonic Orchestra of the Teatro Colón, and he was also a composer, who convinced me that if I wanted to do things right, I had to study seriously first. So I entered the National Conservatory to study piano. And there I began to take part in small concerts with singing students, to which the teachers summoned me because they considered that I had a good voice. It was then that I began to feel what happens when one sings, the unlimited possibilities of the vocal instrument and the physical, emotional, and I would dare say, spiritual fullness that comes with it, the inexplicability of the phenomenon of the voice, in short. And I found it as fascinating, if not more so, than the things I had done before. When I was doing rock, I loved programming new sounds with synthesizers. Now, with the voice, I could also achieve new sounds and expressions, and I was doing it with my own body. I was the instrument myself. So I started looking for a singing teacher, and an unexpected debacle began. All the teachers, and in general, the people of the musical world in Buenos Aires, assured me that I was a baritone, but I knew and felt I was a tenor. I was thus plunged in terrible doubt for some years, until I consulted a gentleman named Carlos Guichandou, an Argentine singer who had made an extraordinarily international career, who was already very old and had settled back in Buenos Aires. He himself had made the switch from baritone to tenor at a certain point in his career. There are recordings of him singing Iago with Mario del Monaco. Some years later, Guichandou was singing Otello, which became one of his signature roles. When I visited him, he asked me to sing Amortivieta from Fedora by Giordano, of which I smashed the high note into 1,000 pieces. Incredibly, this made him suddenly get up from his armchair, point his cane at me, and shout 6 words that I never forgot and I will never forget. Usted es tenor, ¿y qué tenor? You are a tenor, and what a tenor? Well, those are 8 words in English. But that was enough for me. A single person among hundreds confirmed to me what I internally knew. And that is how my story as a singer began. It was Maestro Carlos Guichandou who really encouraged me to become one.
Sie wurden in Buenos Aires, also in Argentinien, geboren. Welche Rolle spielen dort Musik und Kultur im Allgemeinen?
The Argentine musical world is very prolific and diverse. At the Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires, as I mentioned before, the most notable artists in the history of opera, classical music, and ballet have performed since its inauguration in 1908. This theater has 2 orchestras, a choir, and a ballet. It is also a theater of its own production, with scenographic shoe and costume workshops that have maintained the tradition over the decades. And its funds come from the government of the city of Buenos Aires. There are also numerous very important theaters in the provinces of Argentina, which were created by the demand of the immigrants who arrived in Argentina since the beginning of the 19th century. These immigrations created a true cultural melting pot, very rich and bright. Today, in spite of the economic difficulties the country is going through, there are also numerous independent companies that offer opera and concert performances. And as for the music, for me, wrongly called popular, the native folklore and tango continue to flourish as much as it did in the past.
Wie erlebten Sie die argentinische Musiktradition?
The musical tradition in Argentina, in all its manifestations, has had and continues to have a profound influence on me. In my own compositions, tango and folklore, with their musical and dramatic richness, are also present in an inescapable way.
Gibt es auch bekannte argentinische Komponisten, die in Argentinien viel gespielt werden? Können Sie dazu etwas berichten?
There have been a lot of Argentinian composers. Perhaps one of the best known is Alberto Ginastera, with his operas Bomarzo and Don Rodrigo. Also Héctor Panizza, creator of Aurora and Bizancio. Felipe Boero, author of, among others, El Matrero. In recent years, I have participated in the exhumation of two Argentine operas in Buenos Aires, L'Incalel by Arnaldo Despósito and Blanca de Boulieu by César Tiattesi. At the Teatro Colón, I have sung Beatriz Cenci by Ginastera and the world premiere of Bebedón by Mario Peruso. Among contemporary opera composers, we can mention Alicia Tracián, Osvaldo Golijov, the creator of Ainada Mar, and Oscar Strasnoy. He was the creator of 12 operas. Some of them were performed in Germany, I think in the Staatsoper unter der Linden and in Hamburg.
Wie würden Sie das musikalische Umfeld beschreiben, in dem Sie aufgewachsen sind? Gab es in der Nähe Opernhäuser, Konzerthäuser, Musicaltheater oder ähnliches? Und besuchten Sie diese auch mit Ihren Eltern?
In Argentina, there are several opera theaters. I can give you some data about them. In Buenos Aires, we have the aforementioned Teatro Colón, with its large hall with like 2,500 seats. The Teatro Argentino de La Plata, with 2,000 seats. The Teatro Avenida, with capacity for like 1,200 spectators. And other smaller ones, such as the Teatro Roma and the Coliseo Podestà. All of these halls were built between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, with the architectural criteria and acoustic characteristics of the time, conditions that were mostly preserved to this day, with the exception of the Teatro Argentino in La Plata, which was destroyed by a fire in 1977 and was replaced by a new building in 1999. In the rest of the Argentinian provinces, there are also important venues, such as the Teatro El Círculo de Rosario, the Teatro del Bicentenario in San Juan, with a capacity of about 1,100 spectators, the Teatro Municipal of Bahía Blanca, the Teatro San Martín of Córdoba, etc. As for concert halls, we have the CCK, which is a huge complex of like 100,000 square meters with several halls, the largest of which has like 1,800 spectators, with a stage of 250 square meters. The Usina del Arte, which also has several halls, one of them the Symphony Hall, with capacity for 1,200 spectators. It would be tedious to list the large number of spaces that exist in Argentina, but I do not want to fail to mention that there are also several independent companies. So Argentina's musical offer is numerous and varied. Many times I did concerts accompanied by my mother, and also zarzuela shows with my father, but in Chile, the country where he lives.
Sie studierten ja Klavier am Conservatorio Nacional Carlos López Buchardo bei John Carlos Arabian und Komposition und Orchesterdirigieren bei Ntros, Irma Orteaga und José Martí Lorca. Haben Sie diese 3 Studien abgeschlossen?
I completed the piano master's degree at the National Conservatory in Buenos Aires, and I did the other 2 studies privately.
Sie studierten dann Gesang bei Carlos Guijarandut, Horacio Amauri, Nino Falsetti und Maria Rosa Farré in Argentinien und bei Giovanni Consiglio und David Christopher in den USA. Wie unterscheidet sich das Gesangsstudium in den USA von dem in Argentinien? Also was ist besonders oder anders gewesen?
The teachers I had in Argentina had different ways of teaching. Some did so based on their own stage experience. Others had a more scientific approach to vocal technique, and others retained much of the old Italian singing technique. When I moved to the United States, I was surprised, since the teaching of vocal technique by the teachers I worked with was strictly based on the bel canto school. It was then that I began to investigate the works of authors such as William Bennard, Richard Miller, James Stark, Raoul Hudson, Johann Sundberg, Anthony Frisell, Berton Coffin, who in some way demonstrated in their researches using the scientific technology available what the ancient bel canto teachers taught. And they confirmed that those teachings were absolutely right. I'm referring to Manuel Garcia Jr., De Lampertis, Matilde Marchesi, Pauline Biardot, etc. In Argentina, for example, the issue of vocal registers has not traditionally been taken into account, while in the bel canto technique, it is a crucial element for the development of vocality. When I had the opportunity to get acquainted with those vocal schools and the research conducted on them, I was able to understand the method, applying it to myself as a singer and at the same time to teaching.
Waren Ihre Dozenten zumeist Tenöre und hilft es denn beim Gesangsstudium, wenn man Dozenten im gleichen Stimmfach hat?
Only 3 of my teachers, Carlo Chichandud, Nino Falsetti, and Giovanni Consiglio, were tenors who had developed important careers. Although sometimes listening to the examples they gave me was useful, it was merely so that I could confirm that what they asked me to do could be done. David Christopher, for his part, never gave me an example, and I learned a lot from him. Personally, it wasn't particularly useful to study with tenors. I do not believe in learning vocal technique by imitation. Yes, like I said, I think examples are sometimes useful, but a well-given example by a tenor can be very useful to a soprano in order to understand the technical aspects. Each individual has a unique sound, an inimitable sound signature. And I think that is the most important goal to achieve in teaching singing, finding one's own voice. When you listen to recordings of great singers from the past, it is very easy to recognize them. Today, however, that rarely happens. And I believe that the fundamental cause is teaching by imitation, trying to make a tenor sound like a tenor, a bass sound like a bass, as if there were pre-established models of vocal sounds, which inevitably leads to the alteration of the functioning of the vocal apparatus in order to achieve a specific sound, a sound that the fashion of the moment considers pleasant. That is something as damaging to the tradition of lyrical singing as the use of the microphone.
Welche für Sie bis heute wichtigen Ratschläge konnten Ihnen Ihre Dozenten mit auf den Weg geben?
I have received a lot of advice from them that I value. In fact, each teacher left me important things, and each one focused on different aspects. It was I, in my path of knowing my voice and extending its possibilities, that managed to synchronize, so to speak, the various things that were told to me, objectively keeping some of them and rejecting others.
Nahmen Sie auch in Studienaufführungen teil? Und wenn ja, in welchen Opern sangen Sie und wo wurden diese aufgeführt?
The only presentations that I could call studio performances were a couple that I organized myself, being very young. La Traviata and Aida. As you can see, I was young and bold. I also prepared the choir and did stage direction in those independent productions. And I summoned singers and musical directors who, like me, were taking their first steps in opera. Those 2 operas were performed several times in different halls in Buenos Aires.
Im Jahr 2000 debütierten Sie in Il Turco in Italia am Teatro Colón de Buenos Aires. Welche Erinnerungen haben Sie an Ihre ersten Schritte auf der Bühne und was war das denn für eine Produktion, in der Sie sangen?
In fact, I usually mention the role of Alcázar in Il Turco in Italia as my debut at the Teatro Colón, since it was the first important role I sang in that theater. But I had previously sung there many small roles in various operas, roles of 1 or 2 sentences. As Alcázar in Il Turco in Italia, on the other hand, I had a beautiful aria with coloraturas, "Ah, sarebbe troppo dolce," and several very high notes. I remember writing down myself the cadence I used in that area. It was a complete production with orchestra and staging. I was very happy playing that role in that immense theater. It was like a dream came true.
Besuchten Sie auch Meisterkurse? Wenn ja, bei wem und waren diese meist sehr hervorragenden Interpreten auch gute Dozenten?
I have attended a master class by Alfredo Kraus at the Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires, and another, already as an active participant, by Peter Elkus, ex-husband and teacher of the mezzo-soprano Frederica von Stade, as part of the Wagner competition in Buenos Aires.
Nahmen Sie an Gesangswettbewerben teil und half Ihnen dies auch beim Aufbau Ihrer Karriere?
I entered only 2 competitions in my entire life. The Pavarotti competition, when I was very young, in which I obtained the mention of honor, and the Wagner competition in Buenos Aires. This last competition represented a very bad experience for me, and I decided not to enter competitions again. Peter Elkus, the teacher I mentioned before, was on the jury. There were 2 or 3 semifinals because this jury did not seem to be able to decide between another tenor and me. Finally, the other tenor won. It was then that Peter Elkus approached me privately, and he told me that he was sorry that I should have won and that the election had been unfair and he did not agree with it. And he insisted that I participate in the masterclass that he would give for the winners. Even though I had not been one, he considered that I had. I sang in it, and it was very useful to me. He suggested several technical things that no one had told me about before. In any case, I can assure you that the contests have not had the slightest influence on the development of my career.
Bisher waren Sie freischaffend und sind seit 2023/24 im Festengagement am Landestheater Coburg. Wie wurde man in Coburg auf Sie aufmerksam? Und was meinen Sie, sind die Vor- und Nachteile der Freischaffenheit gegenüber dem Festengagement?
It's true. I always worked as a freelancer. My contract with the Landestheater Coburg was a surprise, since I had never before in my life had any intention of being part of a fest. Our opera director, Neil Barrimos, knew about me from my manager, Doreen DeFace. They liked me and hired me. And I truly enjoy participating in these seasons in Coburg and working as a permanent cast member in that theater, in which excellent productions are carried out. In any case, as soon as my contract here ends, I will continue with my freelancer career. In fact, I already have some engagement proposals that I am negotiating. What are the advantages and disadvantages? Personally, this engagement in Coburg gives me the opportunity to experience something different. After the pandemic and its disastrous consequences on the art of music, getting a job like this one is something for which I am truly, truly grateful. I will always prefer being a freelancer, which is my true nature. Both have their pros and cons. In truth, it is a matter of personal choice. One may want to settle for a long time in one place, earning a fixed salary and participating in the operas assigned to him, or like me, have the possibility of choosing what to sing and what not to sing, although in this way, one is subject to quite strong economic and emotional ups and downs. Still, I prefer it.
Sie singen in konventionellen Aufführungen, aber auch in modernen Regietheatervorführungen. Wie inszeniert man Ihrer Meinung nach eine Oper oder Operette so, dass sie den Sängerinnen und Sängern Unterstützung bei der Verkörperung der Partien bietet, dem Publikum beim Verständnis für das Werk hilft, aber ohne dass die Musik in den Hintergrund gerät? Was meinen Sie?
It is a complex question. I remember an anecdote which I find quite relevant. I was singing Werther, and during an interval, I heard 2 members of the technical team talking about the opera. The stage director had conceived Werther as someone who visited an art museum and saw a painting that depicted a family reunion in a garden in which one could immediately recognize Charlotte, Bailly, the children, etc. Suddenly, the people in the painting came to life and talked to Werther, and he, astonished, entered the painting.
Et c'est quoi sobre cette source lapide et la fraîcheur de l'ombre il n'est pas il n'est pas un buisson on éclose une fleur on n'est pas un frisson.
And so inside that painting, the rest of the story unfolded until after Werther's death, the painting frame was smashed on the floor. And one of those technicians whom I heard talking was asking the other what the opera was about. And the latter replied, "It's about a guy who goes to visit a museum and the painting comes to life." Nothing could be further from the reality of that opera. The idea of the staging was interesting, if you wish, but for the audience to understand that it is a free version of the original, they must have prior information. They must know what Die Leiden des jungen Werthers, the epistolary novel from Goethe, and Massenet's opera are about. Then you can objectively assess whether the stage director's proposal seems good or bad, creative, original, etc. But this doesn't always happen, particularly with young people seeing opera for the first time. There are other cases in which the staging changes the time period of the opera, and that is when, for me, there is something that many times does not add up. One listens to music that says it all, like Verdi's Rigoletto, music that belongs to a certain historical period, And if on stage the Duke is characterized as a Nazi leader, the distortion is total and often whimsical. I like new ideas on the scenic level, as happened to me with Götterdämmerung, a highly symbolic and deeply psychological production that gave me new materials with which to work with Siegfried, a character who, from being the hero who represents good on earth, becomes someone who goes through situations that totally transform him and also show his weak and, so to speak, human aspect. And I think the audience perceived it clearly. In fact, a couple of very young kids I know who had never seen an opera in their lives attended one of the performances. I had asked them before, are you sure you want to start going to the opera with this Wagner? Well, at the end of the performance, they were absolutely fascinated with everything. They thought it was wonderful and they wanted to see it again. Two youngsters who are used to spending no more than a few seconds with video after video on TikTok had been sitting for more than 5 hours, captivated by music and drama they didn't even know about. And they even started to recognize the leitmotifs. That's a very good thing.
Singen Sie neben Opernpartien auch Operette, Konzert oder Lied?
Yes, of course, I have sung a couple of operettas, Die lustige Witwe and Die Fledermaus, and I also did many concerts, both symphonic choral concerts and operatic arias and duets. At an early stage of my career, I also did some lieder concerts, Schubert and Schumann cycles.
Wie gelingt Ihnen der Spagat zwischen diesen doch sehr unterschiedlichen Gattungen und was macht den Reiz daran aus?
For me, that balance is internal, a matter of introspection. Without pretending to be very psychoanalytic, each character that one approaches, both in prose and opera theater, represents an aspect of oneself, which may be more or less hidden. And that is what personally I find most fascinating. Each of these characters will be framed in a certain musical context. They will behave in different ways depending on the era, but the essential thing, that aspect of oneself, will be there. And it will be the underlying factor when delineating it on stage. I think that is one of the most important jobs that we singers undertake when we approach a role, whether it is a new one or another that we have done many times before. I really believe that every character I studied grows over time.
In welchen Partien werden Sie 2024-25 zu hören sein und welche weiteren Projekte haben Sie vor?
Regarding the Landestheater Coburg, I will participate as Luigi in Il Tabarro, and I will also sing 2 more roles in the other 2 operas that make up the Trittico, but those are a secret for now. Then I will sing Eric from the Fliegende Holländer and also Laca in Jenufa. In December, I will sing at the Teatro de la Maestranza in Sevilla, Spain, Bacchus from Ariadne of Naxos. And as I mentioned before, I have some more proposals that I am considering.
So schnell
Gibt es Rollendebüts und wie erfolgt das Partienstudium? Welchen Einfluss hat dabei auch das Schauspielerische?
The first thing I do when approaching a new role is trying to get into the mind of the composer. It is wonderful to find those symbols written far back in time by the composer on the score and to have the ability to understand them. But the most fascinating thing is decoding the intention that lies behind those symbols. Although Wagner was the supreme master in music, musically reflecting the psychology and moods of his characters, all the great composers have done so in different ways, perhaps without resorting to leitmotifs, but with other resources. That is a vital part of the study. Once I achieve that, I structure a kind of vocal map in order to approach the different parts of the work. If it is written in a language I don't know, I take care of making literal translations of the text myself and understanding and practicing its pronunciation. Only then I make the technical vocal map. After that, I devote myself to practicing singing the work as much as possible. As singers, do not always have a pianist available, and it gets complicated playing and singing at the same time. So I usually sequence the score on my computer with a music notation program, after which I adjust the tempi and dynamics based on reference recording of the work, convert the sequences to audio files, and practice over them. Many times I go to rehearsal rooms armed with my tablet and my portable speaker for this purpose. This is one of the aspects in which technology is very helpful.
Geben Sie auch Liederabende? Wenn ja, was ist das Besondere am Liedersingen und nach welchen Kriterien wählen Sie das Repertoire für Liederabende aus?
The recitals I usually give consist not of songs, but of fragments of opera, operetta, or zarzuela. The criteria for selecting the repertoire varies greatly. I prefer, for example, to make extensive fragments of this or that opera so that something of the plot line can be conveyed. Other times, it is about making a thematic repertoire about love, farewell, loneliness, or whatever. And in others, it is just a matter of singing well-known fragments.
Singen Sie auch Lieder argentinischer Komponisten?
Yes, I have sung several songs by Argentine composers, many of them premieres for the Argentinian Association of Composers.
Was ist für Sie das Besondere am Konzertsingen und vielleicht auch der Unterschied zum Opernsingen?
In concerts with piano, of course, a more intimate relationship with the audience is established. In opera, there is that distance that the orchestra establishes in the pit, although moments of great intimacy can also be achieved. On the other hand, there are so many possible variants in concerts. There are the so-called semi-staged ones, in which one acts a little, but without sets or props. There are the concerts in which you have the orchestra and the conductor behind you, which gives a very different perspective. I have even participated in a version of Tristan und Isolde, conducted by Daniel Barenboim, in which he decided to place the orchestra in the front and the soloist behind and elevated on platforms. The possibilities of expressing what one wants to express are present in any of these circumstances. Furthermore, whether it is singing at the piano or with an orchestra, in a very large room or in a small one, singers do exactly the same in terms of the use of our vocal resources.
Welches Repertoire singen Sie im Konzertbereich?
I had to turn on the lights because it's getting darker. I have sung very different repertoires in concert. Something that I really enjoyed and had the opportunity to sing several times was Das Lied von der Erde by Mahler, a work with deep philosophical content that in a way is also theatrical. Mahler describes what happens to the individual who contemplates both life and small, simple things and meditates on all that. I also sang Baroque works, such as the South American premiere of the Te Deum by Handel, and Bach's Magnificat in D, and classical works such as Mozart, Brevis, and Coronation Masses, as well as his Requiem, Verdi's Requiem, Puccini's Mass, etc. I also sang operas in concert version, such as Giovanna d'Arco by Verdi at Carnegie Hall, New York. By the way, my first important engagement in the United States. La Damnation de Faust by Berlioz, Samson et Dalila by Saint-Saëns, Rienzi by Wagner, and others.
Sie sangen in der Uraufführung von Il Duce den Conte Ciano am Teatro Solis de Montevideo. Was ist das für eine Oper und was bedeutet Ihnen zeitgenössische Musik im Allgemeinen?
Il Duce is an opera by an Uruguayan composer, García Vigil, and is, as the title indicates, about the life of Mussolini. The language is clearly veristic and tonal. It felt like singing Puccini. Regarding what contemporary music represents to me, it is again a complicated question. Because I have always had difficulties establishing labels, defining periods or styles. I think that is more the work of academics who study the history of music than that of composers. For example, I have my particular views on the matter, in the same way that I consider that the so-called verismo in opera began not with Puccini or Leoncavallo, but with Bizet, or that Mozart's sonata number 457 in C minor seems to already belong to Romanticism. I think, like many others, that the germ of contemporary language, the break with the concept of tonality, was established by Wagner. But surely these composers did not try to inaugurate a new musical period, but rather to find their own language. Scholars then established historical periods based on those creations. When I was very young, I attended a concert by Rosalind Touré, who performed the Goldberg variations at the Teatro Colón, not on the harpsichord, but on the piano instead. I had never heard the dissonances in Bach so exposed as in her playing. On the other hand, she used resources that did not exist in Bach's time, such as, of course, the piano as we know it today, the sustain pedal. And the version was wonderful, although at times one thought that one was listening to Bartók. I also remember being in the choir of Teatro Colón, having sung Penderecki's Te Deum, conducted by himself. Until halfway through the work, everything was his contemporary language, until suddenly we were singing a cappella, a Polish song that he had inserted, harmonized in an absolutely tonal way. And the effect of this was much more powerful than all the dissonances and effects that happened before. A Buenos Aires newspaper published regarding this a note titled Penderecki's Shameful Return to Romanticism. I wondered if it was shameful or if it was simply an expressive need of Penderecki. Return to Romanticism? In short, contemporary music represents for me a whole universe of possibilities, no better or worse than the music of any previous era. Something else I read recently, a review from 1853 on the occasion of the premiere of Il Trovatore, in which there was strong resistance to Verdi, speaking badly of these contemporary composers. Yes, all music was contemporary in its time.
Gibt es Traumrollen, die Sie irgendwann einmal singen wollen, oder Werke, egal ob Konzert oder Lied, die Sie gerne einem breiteren Publikum zugänglich machen möchten?
Actually, I have already sung the role of my dreams, Wagner's Tristan.
Dieser Sonne, zerrenden Strahl, wie brennt wie das Heer, seine glühende Qual. Für diese Hitze heißt es verschwanden, doch keine Schaden, Seelen verraten. Für diese Schmerze schreckliche Pein, welche Walzer sollte mir ein Hinruf verleihen, der furchtbare Freund, der Qual ich vertraut, ich selbst, ich hab ihn getraut. Aus Vaters Not und Mutter Weh, aus Liebesträne hin und hin, aus Lächeln weinen, Wannen und Wunden, hab ich des Dankes Liebe geboten. Bin ich verbraut, dann geflossen, wenn die Wunde spielt, wenn ihr nicht genossen. Verflucht ein furchtbarer Trank. Verflucht, wer dich gebraucht, mein Herr, Tristan.
And I have more on my list. Siegfried, from the opera of the same name, Tannhäuser, Otello, In these times we live in, I believe that all music should be accessible, should be made accessible to a larger audience. Furthermore, I am certain that only through musical education, through teaching, can this objective be achieved. Just as it happened with those two young people that I mentioned before, those who attended the performance of Dialog, which was the first opera they had ever seen and came away delighted. But with prior knowledge, because without this knowledge, they miss the beauty of enjoying the richness of music.
Wollen Sie in Zukunft auch als Gesangspädagoge tätig sein oder sind Sie das bereits?
I have been teaching for a long time, and I have a good number of students. I love being able to awaken in them the interest in discovering what potentially exists within themselves.
Wie erholen Sie sich von Ihrem anstrengenden sängerischen Alltag und haben Sie Hobbys neben dem Singen?
It depends on what you sing. In the case of Tristan or Siegfried, I can't do many things on the next day. Not because of vocal fatigue, but because of my nervous system is completely exhausted. What I can do, and it does me a lot of good, is to go to the gym to train and fundamentally think or compose or watch movies with my wife. She often needs it too because she is also a singer.
Hören Sie privat auch Musik oder lieben Sie da die Stille?
The truth is that I listen to music only out of some special interest, such as studying a work or learning about a certain composer whose work I will sing. In fact, I can't listen to music in the background, like in a restaurant, because I inevitably focus on it, and that's very annoying. A teacher of mine called it music for digestion.
Sie singen viele Wagner-Partien, sind unter anderem der erste argentinische Tenor, der den Tristan in der Oper Tristan und Isolde singt. Wie entdeckten Sie Wagner für sich und warum eignet er sich besonders gut für Ihre Stimme?
It may sound incredible, but during my first years at the conservatory, I had a music history teacher who, upon seeing me with my very long hair and thick beard, told me in his German accent, "You are going to end up singing Tannhäuser, dear Herr Lopez." Paradoxically, that teacher was the one who later helped me discover that I was a tenor and not a baritone. Evidently, he had had a very correct intuition. Yes, my voice adapts well for Wagner. And I think it is perhaps for a matter of timbre and sonority, but also for a technical matter. What actually happens is that Wagner wrote wonderfully well for voices and was, although what I say may seem outrageous, extremely bel cantista in the technical aspect. I approach his works technically in that way, although, of course, respecting above all the theatrical declamation that he cared so much about, and for which he wanted to create a German school of singers.
Ich hörte Sie als beeindruckenden Siegfried in Wagners Götterdämmerung am Landestheater Coburg. Wie würden Sie Siegfried charakterisieren und was reizt Sie so an dieser Partie?
Thank you so much for your words. Impersonating Siegfried gives me, above all, a feeling of enormous freedom from a vocal, acting, and musical point of view. Yes, it has some devilish vocal lines, but once resolved and studied, it is an indescribable pleasure to sing them. As in Tristan, a Siegfried evening represents a journey to which I surrender without the possibility of looking back. Wagner demands that, a dedication without limits. And he also demands that the singer reach the maximum of his possibilities. As a child, I dreamed of playing Liszt's sonata in B minor. That did not happen, but Wagner did happen, which is in short the vocal equivalent of that kind of work. So Siegfried, for example, makes me feel extremely satisfied, because by doing it, everything I studied and worked on throughout my life is put into play. Composition, piano, music, singing, acting.
Sie singen unter anderem in Montevideo, Buenos Aires, Bogotá, New York, Tampa und vielen Orten mehr. Wie kam es zu dieser internationalen Karriere?
My international career arose out of necessity. I didn't have many opportunities in the theaters of Argentina years ago, so I decided to leave the country, and the destination I chose was the United States. The first years were difficult, with economic and all kinds of struggles. But one day, I started receiving contract proposals, and I sang a lot in that country. And also, of course, when they noticed that I was singing a lot abroad, the authorities of the Teatro Colón in Argentina and others from Argentina started calling me. As the saying goes, no one is a prophet in his land.
Sie singen auch Jim Mahoney in Kurt Weils Aufstieg und Fall der Stadt Mahagoni in Bogotá, also in Kolumbien. Wie kam es zu dieser eher ungewöhnlichen Partie?
In fact, that was the first truly leading role that I sang at the Teatro Colón. It is a very interesting opera due to its socio-political aspects and also very difficult to perform.
Stopf in deine Pfeife, alter Junge, auf es Haar, ohne die Nacht, auf mich tauchen. Was gewesen ist, war gut genug für dich. Und was jetzt kommt, stopf's in deine Pfeife. Sicher, der Himmel bleibt noch lange dunkel. Es darf nicht hell sein, es darf nicht hell werden, denn dann beginnt ein verdammter Tag. No.
In 2016, there was an agreement between three Latin American opera houses, the Teatro Colón, the Teatro Municipal de Santiago de Chile, and the Teatro Mayor Julio Santo Domingo from Bogotá in Colombia, in which we did the same production of Mahagoni between 2016 and 2018. It was a very good experience.
Sie waren Teil der musikalisch-humoristischen Gruppe Les Luthiers, spielten in Buenos Aires und tourten mit dieser auch durch Spanien und Lateinamerika. Was kann man sich unter dieser Gruppe denn vorstellen? Was sangen sie so?
It is extremely difficult to explain to someone who does not speak Spanish what Les Luthiers do. Both in South America and Spain, they are a kind of legend. I was 5 or 6 years old when my mother told me, I saw a new humoristic musical group at the Café Concert. They are called Les Luthiers. I became a fan of them. I attended many of their performances. I had several recordings. They made humor about the ridiculous situations that can exist in classical music. They were always dressed in rigorous tuxedos, and they played weird instruments, which they called informal instruments, built by themselves with cans, bicycle, toilets, and such. Those instruments were indeed very difficult to play. Les Luthiers members have very good musical training. When I was almost 30, I found out that Les Luthiers were casting for replacements. I auditioned for them and joined the group. For me, it was like joining the Beatles. I couldn't believe it. I worked for 3 years with them in Argentina and on tours throughout Spain and all of Latin America, and also the United States. Then I quit because I wanted to fully devote myself to my career as an opera singer. But it was a time that I have beautiful memories of. We filled stadiums everywhere. I had never performed for such large audiences, like 83,000 at the stadium in Mexico, for instance.
Außerdem gründeten sie gemeinsam mit dem uruguayischen Musiker und Schriftsteller Leo Masliah das Duo Masliah-Manzitti, mit dem sie in Buenos Aires, Montevideo, Brasilien und Argentinien auftraten. Welches Repertoire spielten sie hier? Und wie kam es überhaupt zur Gründung des Duos?
An Argentine friend with whom we had a symphonic rock band suggested that I apply for a scholarship to study composition in a very traditional place in Argentina, the Camping Musical Bariloche, in the south of the country. We were both awarded a scholarship. Our teacher was Leo Masliah, an Uruguayan musician and writer. Different approaches to musical composition were addressed in the classes. There we had cabins in a heavenly place next to a lake. One night, several interns met in one of them where there was a piano, and we drank beer and sang. I was having a bad time with opera at the time, but at some point I accompanied myself on the piano singing Nessun Dorma. Suddenly Leo Masliah came in and was impressed by my singing and immediately proposed that I participate in some recitals that he would give in Bariloche, consisting in songs of his own. Leo Masliah is even more difficult to explain than Les Luthiers. He has a unique humor that not everyone understands, even Spanish-speaking people. And since I always like challenges and anything that breaks with an established order, I did it. Later, the possibility arose of performing together in an important theater in Buenos Aires, where we did 2 seasons and also national and international tours. I think the name of the show and the album we released says a lot about what this was about. Ópera, castidad y yogur diet, which means opera, chastity, and diet yogurt. Yes, it would be the opposite of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Leo also premiered at the Teatro Colón an opera of his authorship, in which I starred, Los Cantos de Maldoror, based on texts by the French surrealist poet Lautréamont.
Perdón si te molesto con esta sonatina, perdón si te molesto con esta sonatina.
Por cierto me molesta, es tonta y previsible. ¿Por qué me molestas con esa música trivial?
Trivial será tu abuela, pero no esta sonatina. Yo tuve que estudiar durante muchos años para poder componerla, así que ahora la escuchas y si es eso acaso te molesta, yo te pediré perdón. Si te molesto con esta sonatina, perdón. Si te molesto, pero ahora te aguantas.
Perdón, perdón te pido yo, pero no tengo la intención de escuchar esa pavada, por favor déjame en paz.
Yo creo que te estás apresurando mucho al rechazar lo que vos no conoces.
Cierto, pero estoy en mi derecho al elegir carajo que quiero escuchar.
Es verdad, pero dame un minuto nada más para pedirte mil disculpas. No era para nada mi intención hacerte renegar. Yo solo quiero que te dignes a escuchar tan solo unos compases de esta sonatina. Así es que...
Herzlichen Dank für die ausführliche Beantwortung aller Fragen. Ich wünsche Ihnen weiterhin beruflich wie privat alles Gute.